Nneka, a young orphan from Ndemiri, reflects on her difficult life and dreams of finding love and stability. She spends her days working in the fields, longing for a brighter future. She also thought back on how she went from a happy childhood to losing both her parents from a sickness that plagued her village 10 years ago. That plague changed her life forever and left her to fend for herself at an early age. She didn't let her past traumas dictate how she was going to live her life. She made herself happy and was very grateful for her childhood best friend Obinna. A wealthy stranger named Obinna arrives in the village, immediately stirring curiosity among the villagers. Known for his success, he is seen as a mysterious figure, and Nneka is drawn to him despite warnings from her friend Obinna. Obinna will always caution Nneka whenever she told her about the new handsome stranger in the village, saying they didn't know much about him and even know where he was from, as he has no relatives in the village, but Nneka was bent on meeting him and getting to know him. Something drew her to him and she wasn't sure what it was. Maybe curiosity got the best of her, she thought. On the village market day, Nneka went to the market to sell some of her farm products. There she saw Obinna from a distance and watched as he helped the villagers with their produce, helping the elderly move what they had gotten from the market to their homes and coming back to play with the children in the market. She was drawn to his kindness and humility. Obinna caught Nneka gaze on him a few times and he wondered who she was. Obinna went to her and struck a conversation. Their conversation sparked an instant connection between them, Nneka thought. Though a little hesitant, she finds herself captivated by his charm and kindness. Days passed and Nneka couldn't get Obinna out of her mind and wished she could meet up again. She and her best friend planned on meeting up the next day, so she went to bed excited that she could finally tell her friend about her encounter with Obinna at the village market. The next day she went to Obinna's house and they decided to take a walk where she told Obinna about Obinna. Obinna didn't sound thrilled as she told Nneka to tread carefully. She felt there was something off about Obinna, even though she didn't know him much. She felt he was a bit strange. On the walk they met Obinna and Obinna asked to talk to Nneka for a few minutes. He pulled her aside and told her he couldn't stop thinking about her since their last conversation, and he'd like to meet her at the village square the next day, so they could talk and get to know each other. Nneka agreed. As the warm afternoon sun began to soften, Nneka felt giddy as she walked to the village square where she was supposed to meet with Obinna. Among the gathering crowd, Obinna sighted Nneka and called out her name, waving so she could see him through the crowd. They both started with a light conversation, and soon the conversation turned into a deep heart-to-heart as Nneka narrated how she was orphaned and also spoke about her childhood. Obinna listened and Nneka felt really heard for the first time. She also told him how she was keeping herself for her husband, and how she didn't want to sleep with any man until she was married. Obinna commended her for keeping herself until now, as it wasn't an easy thing to do, especially in this generation. He also told her he liked her and she was the type of woman he'd like to end up with. She was happy to hear this, as she had also wanted to find love herself. As the days passed, Obinna continued to meet Nneka at the village square. His easy charm and captivating stories drew her in more each time. To Nneka, Obinna was a fascinating man and she found herself looking forward to their talks, her heart fluttering each time she saw him. She had fallen for him. Unbeknownst to Nneka, Obinna's intentions wasn't pure towards her. His mission was to renew his wealth. That was why he came to a village where no one knew him. He needed someone who he could easily manipulate. Nneka was the perfect target, as she was naive, kind-hearted, trusting, and most importantly, she was a virgin. The native doctor had asked him to bring a virgin for the rituals. He used every trick he knew to win her trust and also pretended to be interested in her, watching as she lowered her guard with each encounter. After a few months of courtship, Obinna decided it was time to make his intentions known. One quiet evening, he led Nneka to a spot by the river, where they often met to talk. The sky blazed in hues of orange and purple, reflecting off the water, casting a soft glow over the scene. Obinna knelt down, holding Nneka's hand. his eyes filled with hope and earnestness. "Nneka," he began, his voice steady but warm, "I have thought long and hard about this, and I know in my heart that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Nneka was stunned, her heart pounding. She had grown fond of Obinna, his gentle nature, his kind words, and the way he spoke of their future. But his proposal stirred a whirlwind of emotions in her, excitement mixed with hesitation. She needed time to process her feelings. The next day, she sought out her closest friend, Obinna, to talk about Obinna's proposal. They met in Obinna's family's courtyard, where the sun filtered through the leaves, casting a gentle light over their conversation. Nneka shared everything Obinna had said, her voice wavering with uncertainty. "So, what do you think, Obinna?" Nneka asked, nervously twisting her fingers. "Do you think I should say yes?" Obinna took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Nneka, I know you care about him, but don't you think it's strange that we hardly know anything about him? He appeared in the village not too long ago, and no one really knows where he's from. Have you asked him about his family? His background?" Nneka frowned, feeling a pang of doubt. "He's mentioned bits and pieces, but he always changes the subject when I ask too many questions. He says it's painful to talk about his past." Obinna placed a gentle hand on her friend's shoulder. "I'm not saying he's untrustworthy, but marriage is a big step. You deserve to know who you're committing to fully. Don't rush this. Nneka, take time to learn more about him. Ask the questions that matter, even if it makes him uncomfortable. If he truly loves you, he'll understand." Nneka nodded, taking in her friend's advice. Obinna's words planted a seed of caution within her, and she knew she needed to follow her instincts. Although ecstatic, Nneka is conflicted as the memory of her trauma haunts her, yet she hopes love can bring healing. The next evening, as the sun set over the village, Nneka and Obinna sat together under an old mango tree near the edge of the square. Nneka took a deep breath, her fingers nervously brushing against the fabric of her dress. She had been carrying her friend Obinna's words with her, and though she cared deeply for Obinna, she knew she needed answers. "Obinna," she began softly, choosing her words with care. "I know you've shared so much of your life here with me, and I love that. But you rarely talk about where you're from or your family. I want to know more about you, about where you come from." Obinna's face changed slightly, and a shadow crossed his expression. He looked down, as if searching for words. After a long pause, he let out a heavy sigh, his voice soft and filled with feigned sorrow. "Nneka," he began, his tone somber, "there's a reason I don't talk about my past. My family. We went through difficult times. Painful times. I lost them in a tragedy, one I can barely speak of without feeling like the wound is fresh again. Talking about it brings back too many memories." Nneka's heart softened, and she felt a pang of sympathy for him. "Oh, Obinna, I had no idea," she murmured, reaching out to hold his hand. "I didn't mean to make you relive any pain. I just wanted to know the man I'm marrying." He gave her a small smile, squeezing her hand. "Thank you for understanding, Nneka. You are the light in my life, the one who has given me hope again." Touched by his words, Nneka felt her own doubts begin to dissolve. She leaned into him, comforted by the idea of being his solace, his future. She told him there that she'd marry him. Later that week, as she walked with Obinna through the fields, Nneka shared the conversation she'd had with Obinna, describing his sorrow and how it had moved her. "He's been through so much," she told her friend, her eyes earnest. "That's why he doesn't talk about his past. I don't think he's hiding anything, Obinna. I think he's just protecting himself." But Obinna's brows furrowed, her gaze skeptical. "Nneka, I understand, but do you really know him well enough to marry him? There are still so many questions. Nneka shook her head, her conviction growing stronger. Obinna, I believe him. He loves me, and I feel it. He's not perfect, and yes, there are things I don't fully understand yet. But I want to be there for him, to give him a family again. Obinna looked at her friend, noting the determination in her eyes. She wanted to support Nneka's choice, yet something didn't sit right. Just promise me that you'll be careful, Nneka. Love doesn't erase the need for trust and honesty. Nneka nodded, but her heart was already set. As she walked away, she was filled with the conviction that she was making the right decision, believing that, with time, the details of Obinna's past would no longer matter, and their future together would flourish. The village were making wedding preparations while Obinna secretly made arrangements for the ritual. Certain Nneka is the virgin sacrifice he needs. Nneka, unaware, is full of hope. Nneka confides in her closest friend about her past trauma, that she's told no one about, questioning if she's truly worthy of love. Her friend reassures her, but this doubt lingers. Obinna secretly visits the village shrine as instructed by the native doctor to make a pact with a powerful spirit. He promises to complete the ritual after the wedding, believing it will cement his fortune. The wedding is celebrated with grandeur, and the entire village gathers to witness. Nneka feels like her life is finally turning around, unaware of the fate that awaits her. A week had passed since Nneka and Obinna's wedding, yet Nneka found herself feeling more alone than she ever had. Her home, which she had once imagined would be filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and distant. There was an unsettling silence between them, one she couldn't quite understand. Obinna had barely spoken to her since they exchanged vows, and each night he claimed he was too tired to share her bed. Nneka tried to be patient, understanding that he might still be carrying the grief he'd spoken of before. Yet, a great discomfort crept into her heart. She had grown up listening to the stories shared by new brides in the village square, stories of nervous excitement, of love blooming behind closed doors. But here she was, lying alone each night, wondering why her husband seemed to avoid her touch and gaze. One evening, as the sun began to set and shadows filled the corners of their small home, Nneka gathered the courage to speak up. She found Obinna outside, standing under the old Iroko tree, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his face shadowed and unreadable. "Obinna," she began, her voice steady but tinged with hurt, "it's been days since our wedding. I know you have your sorrows, but I am your wife now. Shouldn't we share our lives fully?" Obinna's expression remained unreadable, and he looked away, his jaw clenched. "Nneka, there are things you wouldn't understand," he said softly, his tone distant. I need time." Nneka's brow furrowed. "But time for what, Obinna? We are married. I've heard other brides talk about their husbands, about their happiness. Yet you are here, avoiding me, keeping your distance. Am I not worthy of your love?" Obinna closed his eyes briefly, his face betraying a flicker of irritation before returning to his usual blank expression. "This isn't about worthiness, Nneka. There are things you can't know, things I must deal with alone." A chill ran down Nneka's spine at his words. She wanted to push further, to ask what he meant, but something about his tone stopped her. Instead, she stepped back, nodding slowly, though her heart was far from at ease. That night, Nneka lay alone in their bed once more, but sleep would not come. As the night deepened, strange things began to happen around the house. She heard the sound of footsteps pacing outside their door, even though no one was there when she looked. Shadows seemed to flicker unnaturally in the corners of the room, and at times she thought she heard faint whispers, as if voices were calling her from far away. The following morning, she spoke to Obinna again, her face pale with worry. "Obinna, I feel something is wrong here. I hear sounds, Strange whispers. This isn't how a new bride should feel in her own home. Obinna barely glanced at her. His face hardened, a strange gleam in his eyes. Nneka, he said in a cold tone, some things are better left unspoken. Do not ask me again. His words struck her like a blow, and Nneka felt a surge of fear and confusion. She could no longer ignore the darkness that had crept into her life, the distance that grew each day between herself and her husband. It was as if Obinna had become a stranger, and her once bright dreams of a happy marriage had turned into a shadowed nightmare despite her love for him. Nneka could no longer deny the truth. There was a darkness in her home, and it was drawing her husband further and further away from her. Nneka is plagued by recurring nightmares of her childhood trauma. She tries to hide them from Obinna, afraid of what he might think. An old woman visits Nneka in her dreams, warning her of a dark presence around Obinna. She hints at Obinna's intentions, leaving Nneka unsettled. She shrugged it off later as just a mere dream. Late one night, Obinna slipped quietly out of the house, leaving Nneka fast asleep. He made his way through the dense forest, following a familiar path he had walked countless times before. The trees seemed to close in around him as he neared the hidden shrine, a place only known to those who had tasted the dark powers of the native doctor. The air felt thicker tonight, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle, as if the very earth itself knew the ritual was about to be renewed. The native doctor was waiting for him, standing at the center of the shrine. His eyes gleamed in the moonlight, his old skin blending with the shadows around him. Obinna had been here before, many times, in fact, and each time, the wealth he had sought had been granted. But each time, too, the price had increased, and his hunger for more never seemed to be satisfied. The shrine itself had not changed. The animal skulls, the worn statues, the smoldering herbs, symbols of the rituals Obinna had long embraced. The air was thick with the pungent scent of sacrifice. His hands trembled as he approached, but the native doctor, sensing his unease, only offered a knowing smile. "You return," the native doctor said, his voice low but powerful. Obinna clenched his fists, his mind already made up. He had prepared for this moment. He had already taken the necessary steps, gathering the items for the ritual. Nneka's clothing, strands of her hair, and a vial of her blood, all collected under the guise of accidents, all carefully taken without her knowledge. Each piece a small betrayal, a small sacrifice to keep his path to riches intact. The native doctor gestured for him to begin. As Obinna placed the offerings into the large clay pot, the familiar chant began. The doctor's voice echoed in the stillness of the night as he invoked the spirits of wealth and power. The smoke from the pot rose thick and dark, swirling around them, filling the air with a suffocating odor of herbs and blood. Obinna's heart raced as he recited the words taught to him over the years. This was the moment when he would once again touch the wealth he craved. More money, more respect, more power. He could already feel the energy building, the air vibrating with the promise of what was to come. But then something shifted. The pot trembled violently, spilling the mixture of blood and herbs across the ground. The smoke grew darker, suffocating, and the flames of the candles flickered and died. A cold wind howled through the trees, and Obinna's heart skipped a beat as a creeping dread filled him. The native doctor's face twisted in alarm, his chanting faltering. "This is not right," he muttered. "The spirits, they reject the offering." Obinna's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean? It worked before. It always works." The native doctor's eyes darkened. "This time, you have crossed a line. You thought you could keep taking without giving, but the spirits will not be mocked." Obinna's pulse quickened. "What do I do? What does this mean?" The native doctor turned away, fear creeping into his voice. "You cannot trick the spirits, Obinna. This is not the blood of a virgin, and the spirits are angry. Before Obinna could respond, a searing pain tore through his chest. "You must pay for this," the native doctor said. Obinna stumbled back through the forest, the agony in his chest intensifying with each step. He was no longer the man who had entered the shrine. He could feel the spirit's wrath following him, a constant reminder of his treachery. When he finally reached the house, he felt as though he had crossed some invisible threshold, one that separated him from the life he had once known. Nneka was waiting inside, her face a mix of concern and confusion as she noticed his pale, trembling form. She reached out to him, but he recoiled, panic and disbelief clouding his mind. He couldn't escape the growing sense of dread, the understanding that the spirits had not only rejected his offering, but had cursed him for the betrayal of the one thing he had hoped to keep pure, Nneka's innocence. Without thinking, he turned to her with an urgency that shocked them both. "Tell me the truth, Nneka," he demanded, his voice hoarse. "Are you a virgin?" Nneka froze, her expression faltering. She stared at him, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't quite process the question. She blinked slowly, her hands trembling at her sides. "Obinna," she whispered, her voice soft, hurt. "What are you saying? What does it matter?" He stepped closer, his breath shallow, barely able to contain his growing rage and fear. "Answer me, Nneka. I need to know. Were you untouched before we came together? Were you really a virgin?" The question hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating her. For a moment, Nneka remained silent, as if weighing whether to reveal what she had buried deep within her. Then, finally, her eyes filled with unshed tears, and her voice broke as she spoke. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "I wasn't a virgin." Obinna's heart skipped a beat. A bitter taste rose in his throat as his mind raced. "Then why didn't you tell me?" he shouted, his voice cracking with anger and disbelief. "You let me believe it was the truth, all this time." Nneka stepped back, her face pale, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wanted to tell you, Obinna. I tried so many times, but I couldn't. I thought you'd leave me, that you'd never love me if you knew. But now, I see you don't care for me." Obinna's vision blurred, his mind reeling as Nneka's words broke through the fog of his obsession. She had tried to tell him. She had wanted to share the painful truth, but fear had kept her silent. Fear of losing him. Fear of how he would see her. But it didn't matter now. "How could you not tell me?" he rasped, his voice filled with horror. "How could you let me go on, believing you were pure? Your lies, your betrayal, it's my undoing." The words hit her like a slap, and she recoiled from him, her chest heaving as she struggled to comprehend his reaction. "No, Obinna, please," she begged, her hands reaching out. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't know how to tell you. Please, don't hate me. Don't blame me." Nneka closed her eyes tightly, trying to steady herself. The truth, once buried deep inside her, now felt like it was suffocating her. She had always carried this pain in silence, never daring to tell anyone, not even the man she loved. But now, with Obinna standing before her, his anger and fear turning to accusation, she knew there was no turning back. "I didn't know how to tell you, Obinna," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I was scared." Obinna's face hardened, and his eyes grew colder, as if the very idea of what she was about to say had already poisoned him. He opened his mouth to speak, but Nneka raised her hand, pleading for him to listen. "Obinna, please," she begged. "I didn't choose this. It wasn't something I wanted to hide from you. But I couldn't find the words. I didn't want to lose you." She took a shaky breath and finally, after years of silence, began to speak the truth that had haunted her every day since it happened. "It happened when I was younger," she began, her voice small but growing stronger with each word. I was just a girl, too young to understand what was happening, too innocent to know how to stop it. Obinna's anger faltered, his face shifting from fury to confusion, but he remained silent, listening, though the tension between them was unbearable. I was walking home one night, Nneka continued, her voice trembling as the memory resurfaced. I was alone. I never made it back home. He was a man I didn't know. He grabbed me, dragged me into the woods, and I didn't know how to fight him. I couldn't. I was too scared. I didn't scream, because I thought if I did, it would make things worse. Nneka paused, her breath ragged, her hands trembling as the weight of the memory pressed down on her chest. She could still feel the coldness of that night, the hopelessness, the overwhelming fear, and the shame that had never left her since. He took everything from me. Obinna, she whispered. He made me someone I wasn't, someone I didn't want to be. And when it was over, when he left me lying there, I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I thought I could never tell anyone. And then I met you, and I thought you might be different, that maybe you could love me even after everything. Tears began to fall freely down Nneka's cheeks, her voice breaking. But I was wrong, wasn't I? You can't love me now, can you? Because I wasn't pure. I wasn't what you thought I was. Obinna stood motionless, his expression unreadable. The anger that had once consumed him seemed to dissipate, replaced with something else, something darker, colder. But Nneka could no longer look at him. She had revealed the deepest pain of her life, the one thing she had tried so hard to bury. Now, it was out in the open, and there was no turning back. I wanted to tell you, Obinna. I really did, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I was scared of what it would mean for us. And now I see that I've only ruined everything. Obinna stood frozen, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His eyes searched her face, but he could not find the words to comfort her. You've killed me, Nneka, he finally whispered, his voice thick with despair. You've taken everything from me. You are my undoing. The words stung like acid, and Nneka flinched as if he had struck her. She hadn't expected his words to be kind, but the finality of them cut deeper than any wound she had ever known. She had tried to protect him from the truth, tried to keep her past hidden, but in the end, it was her truth that destroyed them both. And now, as the silence enveloped them, she realized that the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had become a stranger to her. As the days passed after the confrontation with Nneka, Obinna could feel the weight of his own guilt pressing in on him. At first, he thought he could shake it off, move on with the remnants of his life. But soon, he began to see things, dark shapes lurking at the edge of his vision, whispers in the dead of night that made his skin crawl. The spirits he had once summoned, the spirits whose powers he had sought for his own selfish gain, were coming for him. At night, he could hear them, voices, low and guttural, speaking in languages he didn't understand. Shadows would flit across the walls, and house, filled with wealth, began to feel cold, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. His health began to fail rapidly, his once strong body withered away as if the very life force within him was being drained. The wealth he had accumulated vanished, as if it had never existed. In the daylight, he could still hear the whispers, feel their presence lurking in every corner. The spirits that he had once believed would grant him limitless power and wealth were now his tormentors. They were relentless, feeding on his regret, his guilt, and his fear. Every step he took felt like an invitation for them to draw closer, until he could no longer tell where his mind ended and their influence began. Obinna's once sharp mind began to unravel. He could no longer sleep, no longer eat, his body wasting away as the spirits drained him of his vitality. His sanity eroded, piece by piece, until he was a hollow shell of the man he had once been. The faces of the dead, the victims of his rituals, the ones whose lives he had destroyed, appeared to him in his dreams, their hollow eyes staring at him with accusation. The screams of the innocent echoed in his ears, haunting him at all hours of the day and night. He had tried to drown out the madness, tried to escape it with alcohol and pills, but nothing worked. The spirits were relentless. They tormented him, whispering his sins back to him, reminding him of the deals he had made and the lives he had ruined. His own actions were now his prison, and the only way out seemed to be death itself. Finally, in a moment of sheer desperation and insanity, he sought Nneka out. He knew he had nothing left to lose, not his wealth, not his health, and certainly not his sanity. He found her sitting quietly, as if waiting for him to return to her, though she knew by now that everything had changed between them. The look in her eyes had shifted from confusion to sorrow, but she still held a semblance of hope, despite everything. "I need to confess something to you, Nneka," Obinna whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. His eyes were wild, his skin pale and drawn. "You deserve to know everything." Nneka looked at him, her face a mixture of apprehension and compassion. She could see that he was not the man he had once been. There was a madness in his eyes, a darkness that had consumed him from the inside out. "I married you," he continued, his voice shaking, "because I thought you were a virgin. I thought you were pure. I thought I could use you, like I have used others before, to renew my wealth. I didn't love you like I said I did. I just needed your purity for the ritual. I needed you to be untouched, to offer your innocence to the spirits, so they would grant me more riches, more power." Nneka's heart shattered as she listened to his confession. She had known, on some level, that Obinna had always been driven by greed, but hearing him admit it so plainly was more painful than she could have imagined. She had given him everything: her trust, her love, her heart, and in return, he had used her as a tool, a means to an end. But it wasn't just the truth that hurt her. It was the way Obinna's mind was clearly slipping away. She could see the spirits in his eyes, the torment he was enduring, and she knew, deep down, that it was too late for him. The damage had already been done, both to him and to her. Obinna sank to his knees in front of her, tears streaming down his face as he begged for forgiveness, though he knew he would never find it. "I'm sorry, Nneka. I've ruined everything. I didn't think it would come to this. The spirits," he choked on his words, "they won't leave me. They've taken everything from me, and now they will take my soul." Nneka could only watch, her heart heavy with sorrow and anger. She wanted to comfort him, to hold him and tell him it would be okay, but she knew that the man kneeling before her was no longer the same man she had once loved. The spirits had claimed him, and there was no redemption for him now. Obinna's body began to shake violently, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the spirits seemed to close in on him. His skin grew colder with every passing second, and his eyes rolled back in his head as if he were being dragged away by invisible forces. "Please, make it stop," he whispered, his voice barely a breath, but the spirits were relentless. They were his undoing, just as he had called upon them to be. They surrounded him, feeding off his fear and regret, until he was nothing more than a broken man, consumed by the very forces he had once sought to control. His body convulsed, and with a final, pitiful scream, he fell silent, his life force extinguished, his soul claimed by the spirits he had betrayed. As Nneka stood over him, her heart torn between pity and anger, she could feel the presence of the spirits lingering, their whispers now turned to a triumphant hum. Obinna had paid the ultimate price for his greed. As Obinna's last breath left him, the spirits dissipated into the shadows, their whispers fading into silence. Nneka stood still, her heart a mix of sorrow and relief. She had watched him crumble under the weight of his greed and deceit, but now, In the stillness of the moment, she felt free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, and the dark past that had clung to her like a heavy burden. She could no longer stay in the house that had been a prison to her, both physically and emotionally. It was time for her to walk away, to heal, and to reclaim her life. The memories of the pain Obinna had caused her would never truly fade, but they no longer had the power to define her. The spirit of betrayal that had haunted her for so long was gone, and in its place, there was a quiet strength she had never known. Nneka left the house that night, carrying with her only what she needed: her dignity, her strength, and the wisdom she had gained from the ordeal. She sought refuge in the village where she had grown up, the place where her heart had always felt at home. The familiar sights and sounds of the village, with its vibrant market and friendly face of her best friend, brought her comfort. Here, she could heal, and here, she could begin again. The villagers welcomed her back with open arms. They had always known Nneka to be kind-hearted and strong, a woman who carried herself with grace despite her past. Though they knew only fragments of her story, they recognized the courage it had taken for her to leave Obinna and start fresh. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life, surrounded by people who valued her for who she truly was, not for the false purity Obinna had sought to manipulate. Nneka found work at the market, helping women in the community. She became a beacon of hope for those who had experienced trauma and pain, offering a listening ear and support to those who had suffered in silence, just as she had once done. She found solace in teaching young women to embrace their strength, their voice, and their worth, no matter what their past held. In time, Nneka met a man who saw her for who she was: beautiful, intelligent, and full of life. His love for her was not tainted by any illusion or expectation, but built on respect, trust, and genuine affection. With him, Nneka found peace. She learned that true love doesn't seek to possess or control, it nurtures and uplifts. They built a life together, one of mutual respect, understanding, and growth. Years later, Nneka became a symbol of resilience in her village, a woman who had faced unimaginable pain but had found the strength to rise above it. She became a mentor, guiding others through their struggles, reminding them that no matter how dark the past may seem, there is always hope for a brighter future. She taught that the truth, though painful, is what ultimately sets us free. And in her heart, Nneka carried the lessons she had learned: that healing is possible, that love, when it is real, is a gift, and that no one can define her except herself. In the end, Nneka found the peace she had longed for, a peace that was hard-won, but worth every step of the journey. She had reclaimed her life, her voice, and her future. And as she looked out over the village, the sun setting behind the hills, she knew that she was finally free to live her own story, unburdened by the ghosts of the past.